All right, we get started. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this didactic of the SAEM Where Are They Now? SAEM Consensus Conference Edition. My name is Sam Lam. I am a professor at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and clinically I work at the Children's Hospital of Colorado. And I'm also the SAEM Consensus Conference Subcommittee Chair for this year. We have a very distinguished panel today for our didactics. And first, we have Dr. Emily Hayden. Let me just pull up her bio. Dr. Emily Hayden is an attending physician and director of telehealth in the Department of Emergency Medicine at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and the director of Emergency Medicine Telehealth Research Lab in the Massachusetts General Brigham Division of Health Services Research. She co-founded the Mobile Response Program and the Virtual Observation Unit, which utilize telehealth and community paramedicine to provide acute, unscheduled care to patients in their homes. Dr. Hayden is the founding chair of the SAEM Telehealth Interest Group, chair of the SAEM 2020 Consensus Conference on Telehealth in Emergency Medicine, and the current chair of both the ACEP Emergency Telehealth Section and the ACEP Health Innovation Technology Committee. Next, we have Dr. James Paxton, who is an associate professor and director of clinical research at the Detroit Receiving Hospital, Wayne State University Department of Emergency Medicine in Detroit, Michigan. He is the outgoing chair of the SAEM Research Committee after 3 years of distinguished service, and is a past chair of the WSU Institutional Review Board. He's an active clinical researcher and has served as a PI for numerous industry and publicly funded trials. Lastly, we have Dr. Matthew Strelo, who is a professor of emergency medicine at the Stanford University, where he serves as the executive vice chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine and the director of Stanford Emergency Medicine International. He is a thought leader in precision emergency medicine, striving to enhance emergency care systems through technology, the integration of big idea, and a deep understanding of the social determinants of health. Dr. Strelo recently chaired the 2023 SAEM Consensus Conference on Precision Emergency Medicine, leading national efforts to set a research agenda in this innovative field. And we have no conflict of interest to disclose. Here are the objectives of this session. At the conclusion of this session, the attendee will be able to describe essential components of the SAEM Consensus Conference planning and execution, discuss the impact of SAEM Consensus Conference on researcher career and funding opportunities, apply lessons learned from previous SAEM Consensus Conference organizers, and most importantly, submit a proposal for an upcoming consensus conference. Here's an overview of the agenda of today. Dr. Paxton is going to talk about aims of the SAEM Consensus Conference and recent changes to the Consensus Conference administration. And then Dr. Hayden and Dr. Strelo are going to talk about the how and why of conducting a consensus conference and potential pitfalls for planners. I'm going to circle back and talk about the short and long-term impact of the consensus conference on the field of emergency medicine and on the individual careers, and then we're going to follow it up with a Q&A session. Okay. Let Dr. Paxton start talking about the consensus conference process.
Thank you, Dr. Lam. So again, my name is James Paxton from Wayne State University. And we want to introduce you first to the Consensus Conference in terms of some of the historical data that we have. This is actually almost about 25 years this year since Consensus Conference was started. It was established in 2000. And the intention of the Consensus Conference is to provide a mechanism for creating a research agenda intended to advance the science on a specific topic of importance to academic EM. But importantly, in addition to creating research agendas, it also provides an opportunity for significant engagement between different researchers and other stakeholders within the research community. I've provided some of the titles for the consensus conferences, and I think a review of these demonstrates that this is a pretty broad range of topics that we've covered over the last 25 years. Without getting into any specific topics, I think it's fair to say that many important research studies have come out of these consensus conferences, but it is a bit of work to develop the conference itself. Just to give some of the mechanics for the application process, generally expect that a consensus conference will take about 2 years to plan, at least a year and a half. And that gives plenty of time to develop the agenda, to refine your methodology, to do background research and review, and to bring on speakers and have people sign up to be at the conference. Applications are generally due in August for the conference 2 years later. So for example, this last August we just collected applications for the May 25 conference. So we're currently accepting applications, ideas for the 2026 conference. So it's a 2-year cycle for consensus conference submissions. We're always thinking 2 years ahead. The application process in the past was quite lengthy. One of the ideas behind having an extended application process was that it was meant to help the people planning the conference to develop an application for federal funding, because that was actually done in many cases to supplement the cost of the conference itself, and to pay, for example, honoraria for speakers to come in and other things that would require additional funds. But more recently, we've seen that most people are not applying for federal funds, and so with the thought of simplifying the process, we decided to abbreviate the application, and so making it easier for people to submit their ideas. The current application process involves submission of an abbreviated just description of the topic of interest, and we review those within the research committee. We have a subcommittee in charge of consensus conference, and we review those and select the top few applications, which are then forwarded on to the board of directors for SAEM to review and help us in decision making on which one will ultimately serve as the consensus conference for that year. I would encourage you to take a look at this website. I'm not going to click on it here, but please take a look at that, and it'll give you more information about the application process and the call for proposals. With that, I'm going to hand it off to my esteemed colleagues to talk a little bit about conference planning, some of the rubber meets road, also some finance and advertising considerations.
All right, thanks. So hi, so Emily Hayden, I think mentioned earlier, I was part of the 2020 Telehealth Consensus Conference. And we have a couple of pieces here on the slide of the different aspects of the application and sort of thinking through process. So I'm going to start with theme. Theme, if you're already thinking of a consensus conference, you already have an idea of what topic you want to be going for your consensus topic. But it's not just enough to know, for me, it wasn't enough just to say it's telehealth, right? Like you have to also think through, and with the application process, have a thoughtful way of how you're going to be doing this consensus conference, including potential breakout groups or breakout groups. And so depending on your topic, there's some type of conceptual framework or framework that you could be using to break things out. We had, for ours, for telehealth, there was a recent National Quality Foundation framework for quality had just been released. And that was one of the options we had been debating about. We ended up going with creating our own, sort of from consensus of the conference chairs and planners. And so we had decided we did 5. We ended up doing educational needs and outcomes, healthcare access, quality and safety, research facilitation, as well as workforce. And so we had those, and so as part of the application process, rather than just saying, again, we're going to solve all of the world problems, you do need to narrow it down, because while it's a big conference and big topic, you don't want to get so far ahead of yourself that you're not able to actually create a succinct or research agenda. So I don't know, Matt, if you have any other thoughts on sort of the theme from when you were doing this, or Sam.
No, I would agree with that. Thank you, Emily. That the key is really to, just like with a research question, you really want to narrow down your topic to something that you can achieve in a single consensus conference, right, and have a real output. So agreed that really spending time on that research question or that theme is critical.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind that the consensus conference is actually to set the research agenda. And so the theme should probably just kind of jive accordingly instead of just like talking about a state-of-the-art kind of concept for a topic. You're actually setting a research agenda. So that's relevant to the consensus conference. I just want to distinguish between the two.
Excellent. Thanks, Sam. I think that leads us then into people, and anybody who has run a conference before can tell you that it takes a lot of people, and as my wife always says, many hands make light work. So I approached this from the standpoint, after we set, and identified our topic, of kind of thinking about it in layers. And the very first layer, I went to my chair and was like, hey, here's an idea. I'm gonna need some level of like support, and that's more emotional support as I go through this process, but also probably some staff time and support that could be allocated to that from our department. And didn't ask for direct support for myself, more just like, hey, be aware that this is going to be taking up some of my time. The next thing we did was we put together an advisory board, and so wanted to have a small group that we could come to quickly to make decisions, so that we didn't really need to go out to all of our work group leads or everybody that was going to be helping lead the consensus conference. So we developed a small advisory board of 4 people. Myself, recruited somebody who I knew was like a real responsive worker, really got things done. Recruited somebody who was our naysayer, kind of our blunt person who would tell us when our ideas were stupid. And then we recruited someone that had a lot of experience, or what I would call an SAEM insider, somebody who really understood the direction of the board and AEM and where it's trying to go and what its values are and what its goals are with the consensus conference. And then that became our team, our tiger team that would make quick decisions and help recruit other folks in this process. And so from that group, we then went about identifying our work groups that we would need. And as Sam alluded to, we had this research agenda, and we wanted to think about precision emergency medicine and how how precision medicine applies to our specialty. So we sat down and we thought about the different lenses and focus areas that we would need to answer this question, and developed our work groups, at least a preliminary draft of the work groups that we thought we would need. And from that, we then went through the literature and our own Rolodexes, and identified people with a real effort to recruit a very diverse set of work group leads. So taking into account things like ethnic and racial diversity, gender diversity, but also geographic diversity, diversity of the type of institutions that people were coming from, what their focus areas, whether it was pediatric emergency medicine or general emergency medicine, and made a big effort to get work group leads from really diverse backgrounds or settings. And so we recruited anywhere from 1 to 3 work group leads across 9, at the time it was 8, work groups. And then we set about with that group to look at our people again, evaluate the work groups. We identified 2 or 3 additional work groups that would be necessary with that team, and then asked those leaders themselves to also take a very diversity-focused lens and recruit an additional 6 members to their team. And so with that group, we all gave suggestions on people, made this working list, and so we ended up recruiting a very large group of hands to help do this big lift. The final thing I'll say about the people is that we knew that time was going to be limited for each individual, and we knew that it was really important for us to dig into the literature and talk to patients. So we actually recruited librarians as well to support each team, and we recruited a patient advocate that was not in healthcare but had experience serving as a patient advocate, and it connected them with each work group team as well. So maybe I'll pass it back to you, Emily, to talk about support.
Yeah, and I actually will go back and say I really like the idea that you said about the way that you did the recruiting and the way that you did your work groups. The advisory board was just amazing. So I think that's really key for people to realize that be very strategic about your advisory board and having some of those stakeholders on there, especially the naysayers. We did just a little bit different for our people with the breakout groups or the work group leaders. Is that we at the same time had just started the telehealth interest group because this was pre-COVID, and some people don't realize telehealth was happening pre-COVID. And so to try to get the cadre of people, we actually had people who were already part of the telehealth interest group and recruited from there. So we didn't actually do what you had done, which was, I think, fascinating to have set the work group leaders, and then from there that they actually recruit people. So I really appreciate that one. So for the support, so we're going to get to in the next slide, speaking more about the support, what we think about for these financial support and the like. But this piece here on this slide, support, is about the support that SAEM provides to those who are putting on a consensus conference. And so this includes everything from a basic set of conference facility needs, such as the room, the breakout rooms, AV equipment, and so on. Because this video is going to be placed and maybe up for perpetuity, maybe this is up for 10 years, I'm not going to say exactly what is right now provided. This is something that when you are looking at your application, it would be wise to check specifically with SAEM to know what they would be able to provide you. They also have staff liaisons that have done consensus conferences for many years, and so they are very familiar with the process. They are familiar with having to herd cats. They're familiar with trying to nudge you along in the timeline. And so they are wonderful people to connect with. And then also it's the research committee is also shepherding this process too. And so there's many people that want to see this succeed. And so that you're not going to be out there floundering and trying to figure out putting out a conference completely all by yourself. So SAM does provide support. Check with them for the years that you are applying, and know that they want you to succeed, so that they will have your back on this one. So.
Yeah, I don't know, Sam, if you want to comment on the board's resources or support as well, because I do think that we reached out a few times when we got stuck to the leadership at the SAM level for help.
Yeah, I think the board is very supportive of the consensus conference. It used to be that the board and the staff would run it, but I think now we have like a subcommittee of the research committee that runs it. So I think it just probably make it a little bit easier. If there's any questions, you can come up to the subcommittee, and we can probably serve as a link, and we can serve as a link to the staff. We can serve as a link to the SAEM board, instead of just you reaching out, because maybe some of the organizers are not very familiar with the SAEM board and how it operates. Then we can serve as a bridge. And I would just echo what was said before. The SAEM staff is very experienced. They've done this for many years. Melissa McMillian has been doing a lot. I don't know how long she's been doing it, but I know she's been doing it for many years. So she knows exactly how to organize a consensus conference. She knows exactly what resources are needed. There's some basic supports provided by the SAEM, but also if you have any questions, just ask Melissa or the subcommittee now. We can help you out.
Thanks, Sam. I interviewed like 3 to 5, it's hard for me to remember, prior consensus conference chairs kind of very early on to get a feel for what I was getting myself into, and to learn about some different approaches. I think that one of the really great things is now with this subcommittee, reaching out to the chair of the subcommittee for that historical knowledge, is a real opportunity. So I agree with that. Maybe we should talk a little bit about the outputs then. And, we talked about the theme, and the output or the mandate in some respects is to really focus this on building research agendas in, areas that need that, right? And so we went about this at the advisory board level and took kind of a research approach to it, identifying our specific aims, right, or our goals, but in a specific aim type format. And we ended up, hoping to get 2 spec aims, but like most grants, we ended up with 3 spec aims. and how to define the special, precision emergency medicine, and if we could develop a shared mental model, the actual bulk of it, which is the building of the 10-year research agenda. And then also we added a third one around education, right? And how do we educate providers to practice in this future state that we were discussing around the specialty of emergency medicine. With these draft, outputs or themes, spec aims, we then brought these to the work group leads after we had, went during the recruitment process, and then also brought them together to talk about these spec aims and refine them a little bit more. And I think that was really helpful to have those conversations to really narrow down exactly what we wanted to do. And much as James said earlier, we took that effort that was part of the recruitment and part of the discussions with SAEM, and we then used that to kind of very smoothly put that into a grant application. And so we can move over then to finances, which is a lot of it. So it's hard to do finances on the cheap, right? If you've run conferences, you know that you're always a little bit on the cheap, but at the same time, if you really want something to have an impact, you have to be willing to try to spend dollars. So that means you have to be willing to put in an effort to get dollars. So with the help of SAEM kind of advising us and past conference chairs, we reviewed a lot of different opportunities for how things were funded. And like I said, we actually parlayed our specific aims that we had developed, our goals that we had developed, into an AHRQ grant that was successfully submitted. But that grant, in my predictions and estimates, was going to cover about 30% of our possible projected costs. So that was, far from where we needed to get to. But there's other things that, help cover that cost. And one is registration. And we took the tact, we recruited a lot of people, right, to be on these work groups, all told, 80 people or something like that, some huge number. And it didn't feel good to ask them to do a ton of work and then pay to attend the consensus conference. And so we put into our budget trying to get enough money to defer those registration costs. But registration, approximately, I'm gonna estimate, and I could be wrong here, about $150 per person generally. And so that also is another income source for you that helps defer another maybe third of the cost with my estimates. And then that left us with two other ways that I was able to discover that conferences had been funded, and that was through industry sponsorship, generally unrestricted grants, at least that's the approach we took, and through academic medical centers and basically departments putting in funds. So I had reviewed a prior consensus conference where they had 10 academic medical centers each contribute an amount. What I did was, rather than ask 10 academic medical centers, because it was going to probably come from the same people that were the work group leads, what I did was I asked our department chair to backstop. And that was a pretty big ask. And I don't think that a lot of departments may be able to do that. But I do think that maybe sharing across a lot of departments hey, could you backstop us if we don't achieve our industry goals, our registration goals, and if we, don't get the AHRQ grant or the PCORI grant, because some other people had used PCORI in the past. And so we asked for a backstop instead. We were able to fund the consensus conference and cover those expenses, cover registration for people and stuff like that. We got approximately 5 or maybe 7 small unrestricted grants from industry, which really appreciated. And through that, we were able to finance it. But I do think that the financial piece feels challenging to a lot of the leaders. And I do think SAEM is working really hard to help with that piece. Let me ask some of the other folks that are helping with this. Emily, do you have thoughts on financing?
Yeah, so I think we did very similar things, except we did not, despite telehealth and technology, we did not have, despite trying, industry sponsors. And so we did also have the AHRQ R13 grant that we applied for and received. We also had, for us, it wasn't the work group leaders per se, but it was our conference chairs. We had 4 I was chair, and then we had 3 co-chairs, and so each one of our departments had put in some money. We asked them if they could help support us, and so once 2 or 3 of the departments did, it was easier to say, well, they're doing it, why can't you, right? So so we had support from our department leads, and then again there's the registration, and the same time is that we were having external speakers we were planning to bring in, and we were trying to also cover their costs for their travel, as well as some of the deferred or registration for those who are on the work groups. And it got a little bit weird with ours because ours was the 2020, so it's supposed to be May, Denver 2020. And then COVID hit, and we very much realized that if we were going to be a group that says telehealth is key for taking care of patients, and is a safe way to do it, if we could not figure out how to do a virtual consensus conference, then we'd be eating our own words. So so it ended up being that we did not use a lot of the funds, because a lot of the money that you're raising is going to be for not only for trying to defer registration costs, but there's going to be other AV equipment you may want to have. You may want to have AV equipment in all the breakout rooms, and that would be extra cost. It's also the food, right? So you're going to be paying for, and you can't have caterers come in and be on, like Matt said, on the cheap, right? You're dealing with the catering in the hotel, which is ridiculously expensive per person, depending, like if you want to have it nice and you want to have snacks and so on. So there are going to be fees. When it went virtual, a lot of those fees were cut down, so we actually did not use all of the funding that we received. So, which was, again, it was COVID, so who knows what's going to happen. So for others, I know, Sam, some of your thoughts on the finance from the one you were with.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same mechanism. I think the consensus conference that I've been involved in are mostly financed by grants. So you get I think we got the AHRQ grant as well. That's kind of supported the main costs of the consensus conference I was involved in. It was a few years back on pediatric imaging, and yeah, maybe we didn't get a lot of industry support, but we definitely get some academic medical center to kind of chip in as well. But I just want to emphasize that SAEM actually provides some basic stuff. So if you don't have any money, the AV cost will be covered, the room cost would be covered. I believe that they would also cover for basic food expense as well. In other words, you probably get lunch, and that's not going to cost you any additional. But if you're going to pay for like speakers to come in, like pay for the ticket, pay for the hotel, if you want a little bit fancier food, if you want breakout rooms with supplies, then that would add some cost, and that's when the additional financial support comes in.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Lamb said exactly. One of the ideas behind, one of the ways we wanted to promote the consensus conference, and the board supports it, is trying to make it feasible to do the conference without seeking external funding. So it's very possible to do a consensus conference without applying for grants, but obviously depending on the type of conference you want to do, the speakers you want to have, the expenses you want to make, your budget may require it. But I think one of the key things that the board has wanted to do and has tried to move towards is making it possible to do this conference without seeking external funding, because they recognize that that is quite a hurdle for people who are already working really hard to develop the conference to have to then also go and apply for external funding.
Yeah, I would say that I appreciated SAEM's support with that grant application, though. I think, Melissa and others with the SAEM leadership, were able to provide prior grant applications, help with thinking about that and how to structure certain things. And I think it really, when you think about applying for an AHRQ grant, it can seem overwhelming, but with that support, it really was a very doable hurdle. So it's great to hear that SAEM is not requiring that, but for, as you're thinking about this, it's good for you to have gone through this process if you haven't before, and if you have before, especially with SAEM's support, I don't think it's a huge hurdle. It just feels like it.
And then just let piggyback on that, and we can switch over probably to advertising in a moment here too, but I think also it's great that it's not almost a requirement anymore to be applying for federal funding. On the flip side, some of the things that we were trying to do is for many of these, we're also trying to influence policy too. And so when some of the people we're trying to invite as participants, some of these people are from federal agencies. So to show that you have received federal funding for it has something more than just being able to cover some of the extra costs. So it is something that, it's great that it's not as much as a necessity when you're applying, and you still may want to consider applying for some of the cachet that comes with it. So I probably said that word wrong, but that's okay. Any other thoughts on finance? Because then I can switch over to the advertising piece.
Yeah.
All right. So for advertising, so you've gone through all of this work to apply. You've maybe been chosen. Now it's time to advertise for your actual consensus conference. You got to think about this even when you're applying, because you also know that this may cost some money too. So for currently, SAEM will do advertising. You've seen a lot of the SAEM emails come through. You may have noticed there's consensus conference announcements on there. They also will be posting things on social media. This is from them. Doesn't mean that you can't also post things on social media as well. And then also other SAEM meetings. As well as their website. So this is the guarantee that's listed up here of what SAEM will provide. When you're really trying to drum up business, because you want a lot of people here, right? You don't want to have a consensus conference where you're trying to gather consensus and then find that only 10 people are showing up. So for most of us, I think we were usually trying to shoot for anywhere between like 100 to 200 people is sort of that piece. So you're going to be probably needing to do more advertising. Some of the things for advertising to know: if you want to try to put something in AEM or one of the journals, you're actually going to be charged for that. If you want to start putting emails on other listservs, such as through other societies, they have some restrictions of other, like you cannot post any other meetings, or you can't post any other meetings within a certain time from their big meetings too. So you just need to be careful you don't step into sort of a hornet's nest on this one. Yeah, I think advertising, again, you want to get people there. There are modes that SAEM provides, and there's also other ways that you can also try to get the word out and try to bring people in. And the advertising piece, too, is going back to that people piece, not only the people that are working on the actual consensus conference, but being strategic about people that you want to reach out to. And it's sort of like individual advertising to maybe the person from CMS, or the person from the CDC, or the person from OII, whatever it's going to be. That's also something you're thinking of advertising. And because some of this is going to cost something, you are going to be putting this in your application, at least unless that's been taken out of the application process. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been hard post-pandemic to try to figure out what advertising works for conferences. I think every organization that I'm involved with or peripherally I've talked with have told me that advertising is a real challenge for them. So, you know, there's some advantages, I think, that make this doable in the consensus conference. One is the regional meetings. So you have an opportunity before the consensus conference. You know, we're still doing regional meetings with SAEM. They're still pretty well attended, and they're real opportunities in, you know, no budget or very, very low budget advertising to people that are very interested in academic emergency medicine. So that's a huge opportunity right there, and probably one of the more effective advertising things, I think. The other thing I think that's a real opportunity for advertising is the AACEM, so the Association for Academic Chairs in Emergency Medicine. They all have this kind of, you know, secret listserv that it's not secret, but they have a listserv. There's also the vice chair's listserv. And so it's a way for you to connect directly with all the chairs, or all the departments, I should say, across the country. And most people in academic departments, which is your target audience, a lot of these folks, are going to read an email from their chair, right? They're going to ignore the email from me, but they will read it if it comes from their chair. So what we did was I asked my chair to send, you know, developed a nice kind of, you know, brief advertising with the link and stuff like that, and then asked my chair to send it to all the other chairs with the request that they personally take the time to send that along to their faculty. So we're talking, you know, less than a minute of time, and all of a sudden we've hit 430 plus academic departments across the US. And I think that was probably one of the more effective advertising pieces, along with a lot of word of mouth. All right, we'll turn it back to you, Sam.
All right, thank you. Those are great tips on preparing consensus conference. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about dissemination and impact of the consensus conference. If you're sharp, you notice that we actually skipped the consensus part because this is a whole topic in itself, and as a service to the SAEM community, the Consensus Conference Subcommittee is working on putting together an overview, a structured review of consensus methods, and this is something that we hope to put together next year or two and as institutional resource. So I'm going to just move forward and talk about the dissemination impact. Now you have finished your consensus conference, what would you expect to come out of it? First, dissemination. The Academic Emergency Medicine, which is the official journal of SAEM, from now on will publish one proceeding per consensus conference that is done. Other manuscripts can be developed and submitted, but are not guaranteed publication at the AEM. However, participants or organizers can submit manuscript out of journals, so there's no restrictions to submit to AEM exclusively. You can submit any manuscripts to any journals that you're interested. Of course, you want to disseminate your findings, which is the whole purpose of the consensus conference. So you could disseminate your findings to interested parties, and you would probably disseminate your findings to the funding agencies as well, because this is, after all, setting up the research agenda and hopefully to accomplish funding for your topic of interest. Next, we're going to touch on consensus conference impact. So far, there have been 2 manuscripts that have been published that formally evaluated the impact of consensus conference on the field of emergency medicine. Dr. Daniel Nishijima and colleagues reviewed publications, findings, and citations by consensus conference authors from 2000 to 2010, and Dr. Michael Gottlieb and colleagues focus on progress in education research since 2012. So first, Dr. Nishijima's paper entitled Quantifying Federal Funding and Scholarly Output Related to the Academic Emergency Medicine Consensus Conferences. And it was published in Academic Emergency Medicine in 2014. Back then, Academic Emergency Medicine would dedicate an entire issue to publish proceedings from each consensus conference. So what the authors did was they look at all these consensus conference issues, and they pick out the authors from 2000 to 2010. They had a total of 852 authors with 280 papers, authoring 280 papers. And they ran all these authors' names through on the Analytics Reporter to query how much of them get federal funding. And of course, that did not include any Canadian or international or non-federal sources, but that's a reasonable quantification of the amount of funding that resulted from each consensus conference. They also look at citations generated through Scopus and Google Scholar for these papers. What they found was that 16%, about 1 out of 6 people or authors in these papers received federal funding totaling $329 million in 10 years. And the median number of funded project per year was actually pretty high, it was 22, with the median funding per year being $20.5 million. And the citation for paper is also very high. Each paper they have citation of close to 16 in Scopus and close to 24 in Google Scholar, which is higher, way higher than the average emergency medicine paper citation. For Dr. Gottlieb and colleagues, they published this manuscript entitled Emergency Medicine Education Research since the 2012 Consensus Conference, How Far Have We Come and What's Next in the Academic Emergency Medicine Education Training in 2019. The idea behind that was in 2012, SAEM organized a consensus conference entitled Education Research in Emergency Medicine, Opportunities, Challenges, and Strategies for Success. So since then, they want to review progress in EM education and scholarship in a narrative format. So what they did was the authors searched PubMed and Google Scholar using key terms and review funding information in selected article. More specifically, they look at AEM education and training in 2018-2019, and they found that 34% of the original manuscript reported some form of funding in that year. They also noted a growth in publication and publication venues for educational research since the 2012 Consensus Conference, and a growth in the number of education fellowship, advanced degree program, and faculty development program in EM education research. So, yeah, these are the benefits of the Consensus Conference for the field of emergency medicine in general. So what's in it for the individual participants of the Consensus Conference? Well, first of all, if you gather a bunch of experts in a single venue, you're going to have lots of networking and mentorship going on. We already talked about the career development impact and the grant funding each author gets at the Consensus Conference. And of course, being a Consensus Conference, you will have interaction with stakeholders and potential funding agencies and kind of pitch your development research agenda and pitch your research idea to people that really matters the most for your funding. I'm gonna let Dr. Hayden have the last word.
I always love getting the last words. No, but someone else could jump in afterwards too. But just, so we just talked about those career benefits, and then just adding a little bit more sort of some individual benefits too, because those who are listening to this are probably considering applying for a Consensus Conference. So one of it's going to be highlighting the topic. So this is a topic you're already passionate about if you're already thinking about going into a Consensus Conference application process. So it's some way for you to sort of put a flag in the sand for your topic to gain more people interested in it, more departmental maybe interest in it, more society in terms of emergency medicine specialty, and so on. And so that's the spotlighting this topic, and then also spotlighting your expertise on a topic. You're going to gain expertise by doing this whole process anyway, but also spotlighting for you individually how you are involved in this area. And then it's this idea that you're publishing a consensus-based research agenda. So you're going to have that as something that you're going to be working with and known for, that you have created a research agenda. So back to that previous slide, the opportunities for both funding as well as other career opportunities there. And then it's also a generate and grow leadership. I know circling back to the piece that Matt was saying about people and how you're going to figure out the people, there were a lot of people I'll say a lot, relatively speaking, in emergency medicine telehealth before the pandemic. And there were people that I thought would be great for it, and they were like, this sounds great idea. I don't have the time to be either a co-chair, I could maybe be on your advisory board, but to be a co-chair or a breakout group leader. So for a lot of the people doing these, I won't say all, but there tends to be much more opportunity for junior or early career faculty, that this is a great opportunity to really grow leadership and grow sort of recognition and acknowledgement of you within the sphere of academic emergency medicine. So other thoughts? James, it looks like you have a thought here too.
Hello? Oh, great. No, I wanted to really emphasize something, because I think we've been doing a lot of talking about all the requirements, all the things you have to do to pull off a Consensus Conference. But one thing I think we definitely want to highlight is this is a truly unique opportunity. I don't think there's anything like it out there in academic emergency medicine. Opportunity for an individual person to really start something that could direct research and establish research agendas for decades. I think that's an amazing part of this whole process, and I hope we didn't make it sound too challenging, because we definitely want to promote people to do this. And it's so important to remember that this is a group effort, and that one person can start and can ignite the process and can start to organize, bring people together, and really make something that turns out to be a really important event that is going to be remembered for a very long time, and it's going to influence research into the future. And I just think that's one of the best parts about it for me. I think the people that are here with me on the dais are definitely some of the people who've been able to do that and get those things done and be part of that process. And I think the great part about this is that any member of SAEM could be that person who could really get that process started. So I wanted to emphasize that.
All right, so we're actually running on time. So we probably don't have time for any questions, but my understanding is that this is going to be recorded. So I want to just really emphasize that this is going to be your institutional resource for planning and executing a Consensus Conference. and come to, we are very open in terms of the Consensus Conference Subcommittee, so any of us would be able to answer your questions. If you have any concerns, if you have any questions, we are your institutional memory and institutional bridge to planning and executing the Consensus Conference as well, in addition to the SAEM staff. So finally, the research committee just want to get some feedback and evaluation for all of the sponsor didactics. And I think that's it. Thank you for coming, and hope you have a good morning.